The alarm clock buzzed at 5:30 every morning, same as always. I'd roll out of bed, splash cold water on my face, and head to Morrison's Bakery on Elm Street before the sun came up. The pay was terrible, barely $9 an hour, but it was steady work, and in our neighborhood, steady meant everything. Mom would already be gone by the time I got home, cleaning offices downtown or scrubbing floors at the mall. Sometimes she'd leave me notes on yellow sticky paper. Ate the last of the cereal, sorry honey, or bills on the counter. Always something about money we didn't have, or food that was running out. Clara was different. She lived in this bubble where everything was going to work out perfectly. Her fiancé Jake had proposed 6 months ago with a ring from a pawn shop. And ever since then, she'd been planning this elaborate honeymoon like we were millionaires. She'd spread brochures across the kitchen table, Bora Bora, Hawaii, the Maldives, and talk about crystal clear water and overwater bungalows while I counted quarters for the laundromat. Look at this one, she'd say, pointing to some resort that cost more per night than I made in a month. Jake says we deserve the best. I wanted to shake her sometimes. We were 3 months behind on rent. The electricity had been shut off twice last year. I'd been eating peanut butter sandwiches for lunch every day because we couldn't afford anything else. But Mom never said no to Clara. Never told her to be realistic or scale back her dreams. She's only getting married once, Mom would tell me when I complained. Let her have this. So I kept my mouth shut and worked extra shifts at the bakery. I skipped meals so Clara could get her wedding dress altered. I walked to work in worn-out shoes while she bought wedding magazines. The resentment built up like water behind a dam, but I pushed it down because that's what you do in families like ours. You sacrifice for each other, even when it hurts. Our house sat at the end of Maple Avenue, a narrow street lined with chain-link fences and overgrown lawns. We'd lived there since I was 8, watching it slowly fall apart around us. The paint was peeling, the gutters hung loose, and the front steps creaked so loud you could hear someone coming from 3 houses away. The backyard was worse. Mom used to keep a little garden back there when Dad was still around regularly. But after he started working double shifts at the warehouse, everything went to hell. The grass grew knee-high in some spots. Old lawn chairs sat rusted and broken near what used to be a patio. There was a swing set Jake and his buddies had put up for Clara years ago, back when she was still in high school and they were just dating. Now it sat empty. The chains tangled and the seats cracked from too many winters. I usually avoided going back there. It depressed me, seeing how far we'd let things slide. But that Tuesday morning in March, something made me look out the kitchen window while I was drinking my coffee before work. Mom was standing by the old fig tree at the far corner of the yard. She wasn't doing anything, just standing there with her back to the house, perfectly still. The tree had been Dad's pride and joy once. He'd planted it the year we moved in, said it would give us fresh fruit every summer. It did for a while, until we got too busy or too tired to take care of it properly. I watched her for maybe 5 minutes. She didn't move, didn't seem to be looking at anything in particular. Just standing there in her old bathrobe and slippers, staring at something near the base of the tree. When I went outside to check on her, she snapped at me before I got within 10 feet. Go back inside, Sarah. I'm fine. That stopped me cold. Mom never used that tone with me. She was the type of person who said please and thank you to telemarketers, who apologized when other people bumped into her at the grocery store. She didn't snap at anyone, especially not her kids. I was just checking if you needed anything, I said, but she'd already turned away. I said I'm fine. Go get ready for work. I stood there another moment, trying to figure out what was different about her posture, her voice, the way she was holding herself. Then I gave up and went back inside. Mom was stressed about money, same as all of us. Maybe she just needed a moment alone. But that evening, after I got home from the bakery covered in flour and smelling like yeast, I heard her on the phone in her bedroom. The door was closed, but the walls in our house were thin. She was talking quietly, almost whispering, but there was something excited in her voice that I hadn't heard in months. I stood in the hallway, pretending to sort through mail, trying to catch pieces of the conversation. I handled it, she was saying. Yes, I'm sure. Clara will be so thrilled. No one will find out, I promise. My stomach twisted. Mom didn't make promises lightly, and she definitely didn't handle things without telling the rest of us about it first. We were a family that talked everything to death. Every bill, every expense, Every decision got discussed around the kitchen table until we'd beaten it into the ground. Whatever this was, it was different. And something about the secrecy, the excitement in her voice, made me nervous in a way I couldn't quite name. 3 days later, I was elbow deep in bread dough when my phone started buzzing like crazy. Text after text from Clara, all in capital letters. Call me now and you won't believe this. And Mom is amazing. I wiped my hands on my apron and stepped into the back room of the bakery to call her back. She picked up on the first ring, practically screaming with excitement. Sarah? Oh my God, Sarah, she did it! Mom actually did it. Did what? I asked, but Clara was already rushing ahead. The honeymoon! She paid for everything, the whole thing. 5-star resort in Bora Bora, spa treatments, the works. We're leaving next week. I felt like someone had punched me in the stomach. What are you talking about? Mom called the resort this morning and paid the entire balance. $30,000, Sarah. $30,000. She said she wanted to surprise us, that Jake and I deserved to start our marriage right. I leaned against the wall, trying to process what I was hearing. Last week we'd had $15 in the checking account. Yesterday, Mom had asked me to cover groceries because she was short. And now she'd somehow come up with $30,000 for Clara's honeymoon? Where did she get that kind of money? I asked. Clara laughed. I don't know, and I don't care. Maybe she's been saving up secretly. Or maybe Dad helped out. Or maybe she won the lottery. Does it matter? I'm going to Bora Bora. It mattered to me. It mattered a lot. But Clara had already hung up, probably to call Jake or start packing or post about it on social media. I stood in the back room of Morrison's bakery, surrounded by the smell of rising bread and cleaning supplies, trying to figure out how my mother had pulled $30,000 out of thin air. When I got home that evening, Mom was in the kitchen making dinner like nothing had changed. She smiled at me when I walked in, the same tired smile she always wore, and asked about my day at work. Clara called me, I said, setting my keys on the counter. She told me about Bora Bora. Mom's smile got a little wider. Isn't it wonderful? She's so happy. Where did you get the money, Mom? She kept stirring whatever was in the pot on the stove. It's handled, sweetheart. Clara deserves this. That's not what I asked. Mom set down the wooden spoon and turned to face me. She looked older than usual, tired lines around her eyes, but there was something different in her expression, something I couldn't quite read. Sometimes life gives you what you need exactly when you need it, she said. We just have to be open to receiving it. That wasn't an answer, and we both knew it. I pressed harder. $30,000 doesn't just appear out of nowhere. Did you take out a loan? Are we going to be paying this off for the next 10 years? Mom shook her head. No loans. No debt. I promise. Then where? It was in the backyard, she said quickly, like she was ripping off a Band-Aid. Just sitting there by the fig tree, a leather suitcase with money inside. I stared at her. What? She turned back to the stove, avoiding my eyes. I found it 3 days ago when I went out to check on the tree, just lying there like it fell from the sky. $30,000, all wrapped up neat in plastic bags inside this old leather briefcase. My brain felt like it was short-circuiting. And you just took it? I took it as a sign, Mom said, her voice getting defensive. We've been struggling for so long, and then this appears right when Clara needs it most. How is that not meant to be? Did you tell anyone? File a police report? Try to find out who it belongs to? Mom's shoulders tensed. Your father wouldn't understand. So that's a no. She whipped around to face me, and for a second I saw a flash of the woman who'd snapped at me in the backyard. Do you know what it's like, Sarah? Watching your children go without? Seeing Clara's face every time she has to scale back her dreams because we can't afford them. I've been working myself to death for years, and we're still drowning. So you just decided to steal someone's money? I didn't steal anything. The words came out louder than she'd intended. It was just sitting there. No one around. No identification. Nothing. If someone had lost that much money, don't you think they would have come looking for it by now? I wanted to argue with her, to point out all the obvious problems with her logic, but something in her expression stopped me. She looked desperate in a way that scared me, like she was trying to convince herself as much as she was trying to convince me. This could be drug money, I said quietly, or money someone was hiding from the government. People don't just leave suitcases full of cash lying around unless something bad is happening. I don't care, Mom said, and the certainty in her voice was worse than the desperation. Clara is happy. For the first time in months, she's completely, genuinely happy. That's worth whatever risk there might be. I stood there in our tiny kitchen, looking at my mother, this woman who'd raised me to be honest and responsible and think of others before myself, and realized I didn't recognize her anymore. The mom I knew would have turned that money in immediately. She would have spent weeks trying to find its rightful owner. She would have lost sleep over keeping even a $20 bill she'd found on the sidewalk. But here she was, talking about signs from the universe and Clara's happiness like they justified everything. What if whoever lost it comes looking for it? I asked. Mom shrugged. Then we'll deal with that when it happens. The rage that had been building inside me for months, about the bills, about the favoritism, about always being the responsible one while Clara got everything she wanted, finally boiled over. This is insane, I said. We've been eating ramen noodles for dinner because we can't afford groceries, and you found $30,000 and decided to spend it on a vacation? It's not just a vacation. Yes, it is, I was shouting now, something I never did. It's exactly that. While I've been working myself to death and skipping meals so Clara can get her dress altered, you found a fortune and gave it all to her for a fucking honeymoon. Mom flinched at the profanity, but I was past caring about her feelings. What about the rest of us? What about the rent we owe? What about Grandma's medical bills? What about fixing this falling apart house or buying a car that doesn't break down every other week? But Mom had already shut down. I could see it in her face. That blank, stubborn expression she got when she'd made up her mind about something and wasn't going to be moved. Clara deserves this, she said again, like it was a magic phrase that made everything okay. I didn't trust myself to say anything else. I walked out of the kitchen, went upstairs to my room, and slammed the door hard enough to shake the whole house. I was washing dishes 2 days later, trying to scrub burnt cheese off a casserole dish and failing miserably, when someone knocked on the front door. Not the doorbell. An actual knock, slow and deliberate. The kind of knock that meant business. Through the kitchen window, I could see Dad's old Buick in the driveway, which meant he was home from his shift at the warehouse. But the knocking continued, so I dried my hands and went to answer it. Grandma Ellen stood on our front porch, gripping her wooden cane with both hands. She looked smaller than usual, more fragile, like a strong wind might blow her over. But her eyes were sharp and focused in a way that made me immediately nervous. "Hi, Grandma," I said, opening the screen door. "Dad's here if you're looking for him." "I need to talk to him," she said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "Where is he?" There was something urgent in her voice that I'd never heard before. Grandma Ellen was Dad's mother, a tough old woman who'd raised 4 kids by herself after Grandpa died in Vietnam. She didn't get flustered about anything. She'd survived the loss of her husband, raised her children through poverty and recession, and buried 2 of her sons before she turned 70. Nothing rattled her, but she looked rattled now. "Dad!" I called toward the living room. "Grandma's here." He appeared in the doorway wearing his work clothes, surprised but not unhappy to see her. "Hey, Mom, what brings you by? You could have called. I would have picked you up." Grandma Ellen didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Son, I need to ask you something important. Where's the money I left in the leather suitcase?" The words hit the room like a physical blow. I felt my stomach drop to somewhere around my knees. Dad's face went completely blank. "What?" he said. "The leather suitcase I told you about last month. The one I said I'd hidden somewhere safe in case something happened to me." Her voice was getting stronger, more insistent. "Where is it?" Dad looked genuinely confused. "Mom, you never told me about any suitcase. What are you talking about?" "I called you on the phone," Grandma said, her voice rising slightly. "I said I was worried about keeping all that cash in the house, so I was going to hide it somewhere until I could get to the bank. I told you I'd put it somewhere you could find it if anything happened to me." My mother had been washing dishes in the kitchen, but I could hear her movements getting slower, quieter. She was listening to every word. "When did you call me?" Dad asked, running a hand through his hair. "I don't remember any conversation about money or a suitcase. 3 weeks ago." Tuesday evening. You were working late, but you answered the phone. Grandma's grip on her cane was so tight, her knuckles had gone white. I told you I'd put $30,000 in that old leather briefcase your father used to carry, and I'd hidden it somewhere safe until I could figure out what to do with it. $30,000. The exact amount Mom had supposedly found in the backyard. Dad's face had gone pale. Mom, I swear to you, I don't remember that conversation. Maybe you called when I was really tired or distracted or... Where did you tell her to hide it? I interrupted, my voice sounding strange and far away. Both of them looked at me like they'd forgotten I was there. I didn't tell her to hide it anywhere. Dad said, I'm telling you, I don't remember any phone call about money. Grandma Ellen studied his face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. You were half asleep when I called. You probably don't remember, but I asked you where would be a safe place to put it temporarily, and you said maybe by that old fig tree in the backyard. You said no one ever goes back there anymore. The casserole dish I'd been holding slipped out of my hands and crashed to the kitchen floor, shattering into a dozen pieces. Mom appeared in the doorway like she'd been summoned, her face drained of all color. What's going on? She asked, but her voice was barely a whisper. Dad turned to look at her, and I watched understanding dawn in his eyes like the worst kind of sunrise. Patricia, he said slowly. What did you do? Mom's mouth opened and closed without any sound coming out. She looked like a fish gasping for air. That was for emergencies, Grandma Ellen said, her voice getting stronger. That money was everything I had left from your father's life insurance. From selling the house, from 40 years of saving every penny I could. I was going to put it in a certificate of deposit, but the bank was closed and I was scared to keep it in the house over the weekend. The silence stretched out between all of us like a rubber band about to snap. You found it, didn't you? Dad said to Mom. It wasn't really a question. Mom finally found her voice. I didn't know. There was no note. No identification. Of course there was no identification. Grandma Ellen's cane hit the floor with a sharp crack. It was hidden. That was the whole point. I thought it was a sign, Mom said weakly. I thought the universe was providing for us when we needed it most. Dad laughed, but it was the most bitter sound I'd ever heard come out of him. The universe? Patricia, you stole $30,000 from my mother. I didn't steal anything. The words came out desperate, pleading. It was just sitting there and Clara needed... Clara needed? Dad's voice was rising now. What about what my mother needed? What about the fact that this was her entire life savings? Grandma Ellen had gone very quiet, very still. When she spoke again, her voice was deadly calm. Where is the money now? Mom's face crumpled. Clara's honeymoon. I already paid for everything. You spent it. It wasn't a question. I can get a loan, Mom said desperately. I can pay it back, I promise. I'll work extra shifts, With what credit? Dad asked. We can't even qualify for a car loan. The front door burst open and Clara walked in, probably coming to show off something else she'd bought for her trip. She took one look at all of us. Grandma Ellen with her cane, Dad's furious face, Mom crying, me standing in a pile of broken ceramic, and stopped dead. What's going on? She asked. Your honeymoon money, I said, my voice sounding hollow and strange. It belonged to Grandma Ellen. Clara's face went through about 6 different expressions in the span of 3 seconds. Confusion, disbelief, understanding, and finally something that looked like panic. What do you mean it belonged to her? I mean Mom stole it, I said. She found $30,000 that Grandma had hidden for safekeeping and decided it was a gift from the universe. Clara looked at Mom, then at Dad, then at Grandma Ellen. But I already bought everything. The flights are non-refundable. The resort is paid for. We leave tomorrow. Then you're not going, Dad said flatly. But we have to go. Everything's already arranged. With stolen money, I said. Clara's face was getting red. It wasn't stolen. Mom found it. She said it was just lying there. Because I hid it there, Grandma Ellen said quietly. Because your father told me it would be safe. The room went completely silent. Clara looked like someone had slapped her. Mom was crying harder now, quiet sobs that shook her whole body. Dad was staring at the wall like he was trying to see through it to somewhere else entirely. I can fix this, Mom said through her tears. I can make this right. But even as she said it, I think we all knew it was too late for that. The money was gone. Clara's dreams were shattered, and trust that had taken years to build had been destroyed in a single moment of desperate stupidity. Grandma Ellen turned toward the door, moving slowly but with purpose. Where are you going? Dad asked. Home, she said without looking back. I need to figure out how I'm going to pay for my medication this month. The front door closed behind her with a soft click, and the sound echoed through our house like a gunshot. After Grandma Ellen left, the house felt like a bomb had gone off inside it. Dad stood in the middle of the living room, running his hands through his hair over and over again, like he was trying to physically hold his thoughts together. Mom had collapsed into one of the kitchen chairs and was crying into her hands. Clara kept pacing back and forth, her face getting redder by the minute. This can't be happening, Clara said for the 5th time. This seriously cannot be happening right now. Dad finally exploded. $30,000, Patricia. $30,000. Do you have any idea what you've done? His voice bounced off the walls, louder than I'd ever heard it. Dad wasn't a yeller. Even during their worst fights, he kept his voice level, controlled. But now he was storming around the kitchen like a caged animal, gesturing wildly with his hands. That was everything she had left. Everything. She sold her house. She cashed out her retirement. She's been living on Social Security and whatever we can give her. And you just... He stopped mid-sentence and pressed his palms against his eyes. Jesus Christ, Patricia. What were you thinking? I was thinking about our family. Mom shot back, lifting her head from her hands. I was thinking about Clara's happiness, about finally being able to give her something special, with money that wasn't yours. I didn't know it wasn't mine. You didn't want to know. Dad's voice cracked on the last word. You found $30,000 in cash and you didn't ask questions because you didn't want to hear the answers. Clara's phone started ringing in the middle of their screaming match. She looked at the screen and her face went white. It's Jake, she said. He's probably calling about the flight times. Don't answer it, I said. I have to answer it. We're supposed to leave in 18 hours. Clara, Dad said, his voice getting that deadly calm tone that was somehow worse than the yelling. You're not going anywhere. Yes, I am. Clara's voice was getting shrill. I don't care whose money it was originally. Mom gave it to me, the resort is paid for, and I'm getting married in 2 weeks. I deserve this honeymoon. The word deserve hung in the air like a slap. Dad stared at Clara like he'd never seen her before. You deserve it? He repeated quietly. Yes. Do you know what I've been through? Do you know how hard it's been planning a wedding with no money? I've had to scale back everything. The dress, the flowers, the reception. This honeymoon was the one thing I didn't have to compromise on, and now you want to take it away from me too? It's not our money to take away, I shouted. It never was. Clara whirled around to face me. Shut up, Sarah. This doesn't even concern you. It concerns all of us. That was Grandma's life savings. Well, maybe Grandma shouldn't have hidden money in other people's backyards. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the refrigerator humming in the kitchen. Dad looked like Clara had just punched him in the stomach. That's my mother you're talking about, he said very quietly. Clara's phone rang again. This time she answered it without hesitation. Hey, babe, she said, her voice artificially bright. No, everything's fine. Just some family drama, but it's handled. Dad started walking toward her, his face dark with anger. But Clara held up one finger and kept talking. Yeah, I'm all packed. Can't wait to see you at the airport tomorrow morning. Clara, Mom said weakly. Honey, maybe you should tell Jake what's happening. Nothing's happening, Clara said into the phone. My family's just being dramatic about money like always. You know how they are. That's when Dad lost it completely. He crossed the room in 3 quick steps and grabbed the phone out of Clara's hand. Jake, he said into the phone. This is Clara's father. The honeymoon is canceled. The money we used to pay for it was stolen from my mother. Dad! Clara screamed, lunging for the phone. Dad held it away from her. That's right, stolen. My wife found $30,000 that belonged to my elderly mother and decided to spend it on your vacation without telling anyone. I could hear Jake's voice through the speaker, confused and alarmed, asking questions Dad wasn't waiting around to answer. So you need to call the airline and the resort and cancel everything, because we're going to need every penny back to return to the rightful owner." Clara was crying now, angry tears streaming down her face. "You're ruining everything. This was supposed to be perfect." Dad handed her back the phone. "Your honeymoon was built on theft, Clara. There's nothing perfect about that." Jake was still talking when Clara put the phone back to her ear, his voice rapid and panicked. She listened for about 10 seconds before her face crumpled completely. "What do you mean we can't get refunds?" she said. "It has to be refundable. It's an emergency." She walked into the hallway, still arguing with Jake, her voice getting more desperate by the minute. I could hear pieces of the conversation. Something about cancellation policies and travel insurance and non-refundable deposits. Mom had started crying again, harder than before. Dad sat down across from her at the kitchen table and put his head in his hands. 40 years, he said, his voice muffled. She saved for 40 years. Worked double shifts at the factory. Never bought herself anything nice. Lived in that tiny apartment so she could put money away for emergencies. "I didn't know," Mom whispered. "You didn't want to know," Dad said again. "That's different. I can get a loan. I can work more hours. I can..." "With what collateral, Patricia? We don't own anything. We can barely keep up with the bills we already have." Clara came back into the kitchen, her face blotchy and red. "The resort won't refund anything. Neither will the airline. Jake says maybe we can get some of it back if we file an insurance claim, but it could take months." "How much?" Dad asked. "Maybe half, if we're lucky." Dad laughed, but it was the sound someone makes when they're about to cry. "So we're out $15,000 minimum. $15,000 that belongs to my mother." "I'll figure something out," Mom said desperately. "I'll call the resort myself, explain the situation." "The situation where you stole the money in the first place?" Dad asked. "You think that's going to help?" Mom flinched like he'd hit her. "I didn't steal it. I found it. In a place where my mother hid it after telling me she was going to hide it there." Dad was yelling again. "Which means on some level, you knew it belonged to someone. I was half asleep when she called." "So you do remember the call?" The accusation hung in the air between them. Mom's face went through a series of expressions. Surprise, guilt, defiance, and finally something that looked like defeat. "Maybe," she said quietly. "Maybe I remember something. But it was so vague. And when I found the money, it seemed like what? Like maybe I'd dreamed it. Like maybe it was just wishful thinking." Dad stared at her for a long moment. "So you chose to believe it was a dream rather than do the right thing. I chose to believe that sometimes good things happen to good people. By taking money from my 78-year-old mother." Clara slammed her hand down on the kitchen counter. "Stop fighting! Just stop! None of this fixes anything." But they couldn't stop. 3 years of financial stress, of working multiple jobs and never having enough, of watching Clara get everything she wanted while the rest of us scraped by. It all came pouring out at once. Dad accused Mom of always putting Clara first, of never considering the consequences of her actions. Mom accused Dad of never being supportive, of always expecting the worst from her. Clara blamed both of them for ruining her life, for never being able to provide the kind of wedding she'd dreamed of. I sat on the stairs and watched my family tear each other apart. Every secret resentment, every buried frustration, every moment of jealousy or disappointment. It all came spilling out like poison from a burst pipe. The worst part was that they weren't wrong about each other. Mom did put Clara first. Always. Dad was pessimistic about money, always expecting disaster. Clara was selfish, always focused on what she wanted, rather than what the family could afford. But they weren't entirely wrong about themselves either. Mom worked herself to exhaustion trying to provide for us. Dad carried the weight of supporting a family on a warehouse worker's salary. Clara had grown up watching her parents struggle and dreaming of something better. We were all just trying to survive, and somehow we'd ended up destroying each other instead. I woke up the next morning to the sound of Mom moving around downstairs. It was barely 6 a.m., but I could hear her in the kitchen, opening and closing cabinets, running water, doing dishes that were probably already clean. She did that when she was nervous, cleaned things over and over again like she could scrub away whatever was bothering her. Dad's side of the bed was empty when I walked past their room. His work boots were gone from beside the door, and his overnight bag wasn't in the closet where he usually kept it. I found Mom standing at the sink, washing the same coffee mug for the third time since I'd been watching. Her eyes were red and puffy, and she was still wearing yesterday's clothes. "Where's Dad?" I asked. "He went to stay with Uncle Mike for a few days," she said without looking at me. "He needs some space to think." Space to think. That was Mom speak for, "Your father is so angry he can't stand to be in the same house as me." What about Grandma Ellen? Mom's shoulders tensed. "I'm going to drive over there this morning. Try to explain things properly. See if we can work something out." She finally set down the mug and turned to face me. She looked smaller somehow, like the fight had taken something out of her that she couldn't get back. "I know you're angry with me," she said. "I know you think I'm a terrible person." I wanted to tell her she was wrong, that I didn't think she was terrible, but the words wouldn't come. Part of me did think she was terrible, or at least, part of me thought she'd done something terrible, which felt like the same thing. "Why didn't you turn it in?" I asked instead. "Even if you thought it was just luck, why didn't you at least try to find out where it came from?" Mom leaned against the counter and rubbed her face with both hands. "Have you ever wanted something so badly that you convinced yourself you deserved it? Not something that belonged to someone else. I didn't know it belonged to someone else. Not for sure." She paused. Or maybe I didn't want to know for sure. At least she was being honest now. "Clara's been planning this wedding for 2 years," Mom continued. "Every day she'd show me pictures of dresses she couldn't afford, venues that were out of our budget, honeymoon destinations that cost more than your father makes in 6 months. And every day, I had to watch her scale back her dreams a little bit more. So you decided to steal money to fix that. I decided to take what felt like a gift and use it to make my daughter happy. The difference between those two things was smaller than Mom wanted to admit, but I didn't push it. She looked fragile enough to break completely if I said the wrong thing. What are you going to tell Grandma Ellen?" "The truth. That I found the money and thought it was abandoned. That I'm sorry, and I'll find a way to pay her back." "How?" Mom shrugged. "I'll figure something out. Take out a second mortgage maybe. Or get a loan against the car. We don't have enough equity in the house for a second mortgage, and the car is 15 years old. Then I'll find another way." But we both knew there wasn't another way. People like us didn't have backup plans or hidden assets. We lived paycheck to paycheck, one emergency away from disaster, and this was the kind of emergency that destroyed families permanently. I left Mom in the kitchen and walked over to Grandma Ellen's apartment complex on Birch Street. It was one of those low-income senior housing places, clean but depressing, with identical front doors and tiny windows that never let in enough light. Grandma was sitting on her little patio when I got there, drinking coffee from a chipped ceramic mug and staring out at the parking lot. "Hi, Grandma," I said, approaching slowly like she was a wild animal that might run away. "Sarah." She didn't sound surprised to see me. "I wondered if one of you would come by. Mom's going to come talk to you later. She wants to explain things." Grandma Ellen made a sound that might have been a laugh if it hadn't been so bitter. "Explain what?" "How she found $30,000 and decided it was hers to spend." I sat down in the plastic chair next to hers. Up close, she looked even more fragile than she had yesterday. Her hands were shaking slightly, and there were dark circles under her eyes like she hadn't slept. "She said she didn't know it was yours. Your father told her where to hide it. Maybe he doesn't remember the conversation, but she does. Deep down, she knows exactly whose money that was." We sat in silence for a while, watching cars come and go in the parking lot. Finally, Grandma Ellen spoke again. "That money was supposed to last me the rest of my life," she said quietly. "I've got diabetes, high blood pressure, arthritis in both my knees. The medications alone cost more than my Social Security check each month. Mom says she's going to pay you back." "With what?" "Your parents can barely keep the lights on." She was right, and we both knew it. Even if Mom somehow managed to get a loan, it would take years to pay back that kind of money. Years that Grandma Ellen might not have. "I'm not angry with you," Grandma Ellen said suddenly. "Or your father. This isn't your fault. It feels like it is." "Why?" I tried to find words for the guilt that had been eating at me since yesterday. because I knew something was wrong when she found the money. I should have pushed harder, asked more questions. Maybe nothing. Grandma Ellen interrupted. Your mother made a choice. A series of choices, actually. You can't take responsibility for someone else's decisions. A car pulled into the parking lot, and I recognized Mom's old Honda. She got out slowly, like she was walking to her own execution, and made her way toward us. Patricia, Grandma Ellen said when Mom reached the patio. Mrs. Coleman. Mom's voice was barely above a whisper. I came to apologize, and to explain. I'm listening. Mom had clearly rehearsed what she was going to say, but under Grandma Ellen's steady gaze, the words came out jumbled and desperate. She talked about finding the suitcase, about thinking it was abandoned, about wanting to give Clara something special. She promised to pay every penny back, to work extra jobs, to do whatever it took to make things right. Grandma Ellen listened without interrupting. When Mom finally stopped talking, the silence stretched out so long I started to worry that Grandma had decided not to respond at all. That money represented 40 years of my life, she said finally. 40 years of working double shifts, of buying generic groceries, of wearing the same winter coat until it fell apart. Every dollar was a sacrifice I made so I'd have something to fall back on when I got old. Mom was crying again, quiet tears that she didn't bother to wipe away. I trusted your family, Grandma Ellen continued. When I called your husband and told him I needed a safe place to hide that money temporarily, I never imagined it would disappear. I never imagined someone I loved would take it. I'll pay you back, Mom said desperately. I promise. How? I don't know yet, but I will. I'll find a way. Grandma Ellen stood up slowly, using her cane for support. Patricia, I've known you for 22 years. You're a good person who made a terrible mistake, but good intentions don't pay for medications or rent. She walked to her front door, then turned back to look at us. I don't want your apologies, she said. I want my money back. Until that happens, I think it's best if we don't see each other. The door closed behind her with a soft click, and Mom collapsed into the plastic chair, like her legs wouldn't hold her anymore. Clara never went to Bora Bora. She spent what should have been her honeymoon week at Jake's apartment, crying and calling airlines and trying to figure out if there was any way to salvage the situation. Jake, to his credit, didn't break off the engagement, but I could tell the whole thing had shaken him. He'd grown up with money, and the idea that his future in-laws were capable of this kind of chaos was clearly hard for him to process. Dad came home after 4 days, but things between him and Mom were different. They moved around each other like strangers, polite but distant. He'd say good morning, and she'd say coffee's fresh, and that would be the extent of their conversation. 6 months later, our house felt like a museum of a family that used to exist. Dad still came home from work every evening. Mom still cooked dinner most nights, and I still worked at the bakery, but we moved through our routines like actors playing roles we'd forgotten how to feel. The silence was the worst part. We'd never been a family that talked about feelings much, but before the suitcase, we at least talked about practical things, bills that needed paying, groceries we were running low on, whose turn it was to take out the trash. Now even those conversations felt loaded with everything we weren't saying. Dad tried to get a second job to help pay back Grandma Ellen, but at 52 with a bad back and no college degree, his options were limited. He picked up weekend shifts at a warehouse across town, which meant I barely saw him anymore. When I did, he looked exhausted in a way that went deeper than just being tired. Mom threw herself into cleaning houses with an intensity that worried me. She was working 12-hour days, coming home with her hands cracked and bleeding from industrial cleaning supplies, barely speaking except to ask if anyone needed anything. She'd lost weight, and there were new lines around her eyes that made her look older than her age. The guilt was eating her alive, but she was too proud to admit it. Clara and Jake postponed their wedding indefinitely. Not canceled, postponed. Clara kept insisting it was just temporary, that they needed time to save up for the kind of celebration they wanted, but I could tell Jake was having second thoughts about joining our family. Who could blame him? She moved in with her friend Jessica across town and picked up shifts at a restaurant downtown. We barely heard from her except for the occasional text asking if anyone had heard from Grandma Ellen. Speaking of Grandma Ellen, true to her word, she'd cut off contact with all of us. Dad tried calling a few times, but she never answered. When he drove over to her apartment, she wouldn't come to the door. It was like she'd decided we were dead to her. And maybe that was easier than dealing with the mess we'd made of her life. I found out from my cousin Danny that she'd had to move to an even smaller apartment in a worse part of town. The medical bills were piling up, and without her savings, she couldn't keep up with the rent. Danny said she'd applied for assistance programs, but the waiting lists were months long. Every night, I lay in bed thinking about her alone in some tiny studio apartment, rationing her medications because she couldn't afford the full doses her doctor prescribed. The image haunted me worse than any nightmare. I quit the bakery in October and got a job at the community center on Oak Street. It paid better. Not much, but enough that I could start saving a little bit each month. The work was different too. Instead of mixing dough and frosting cupcakes, I helped run after-school programs for kids whose parents worked late. It felt good to do something that mattered, something that helped people instead of just feeding them sugar. The kids reminded me of Clara and me when we were little, full of dreams about the future, convinced that everything would work out perfectly if they just wanted it badly enough. I tried to teach them practical skills alongside the fun stuff. How to budget allowance money, how to research before making big decisions, how to tell the difference between wanting something and needing it. Maybe if someone had taught Clara those lessons, we wouldn't be in this mess. One evening in late November, I was walking home from work when I saw Dad sitting in his truck in our driveway. He wasn't getting out, just sitting there with the engine off, staring at the house like he was trying to decide whether he wanted to go inside. I knocked on his window and he rolled it down. "You okay?" I asked. He laughed, but it sounded hollow. "Define okay. Want to take a drive?" We ended up at the Dairy Queen on Route 9, sharing a basket of fries and not talking about anything important. But as we were getting ready to leave, Dad suddenly spoke up. "I keep thinking about that phone call," he said. "The one from your grandmother about hiding the money. You said you didn't remember it." I didn't. Not at first. But little pieces keep coming back to me. He stared out the window at the parking lot. I was exhausted that night, working overtime, worried about bills, barely staying awake. When she called, I think I just said whatever would get her off the phone fastest. "So you do remember telling her about the fig tree?" "Maybe. It's all fuzzy, but yeah, maybe I did." He turned to look at me. "Does that make this my fault too?" I thought about it for a long moment. "I think there's enough blame to go around for everyone. Your mother's not a bad person, Sarah. She wanted so badly to be able to give Clara something special. She spent years watching other people's kids get things we couldn't afford, and when she found that money, it felt like finally, she could be the kind of mother she'd always wanted to be. But it wasn't her money to give. No, it wasn't." He crumpled up his napkin and tossed it in the basket. "I don't know how we come back from this. Maybe we don't," I said. "Maybe we just figure out how to move forward." That weekend, I did something I'd been thinking about for months. I walked to the backyard and stood by the old fig tree where Mom had found the suitcase. The ground was bare now, just dirt and a few stubborn weeds. It was hard to imagine that this unremarkable patch of earth had been the epicenter of our family's destruction. But as I stood there, I realized something. The money hadn't destroyed us. The money had just revealed what was already broken. The favoritism, the financial stress, the way we all enabled each other's worst impulses instead of talking honestly about our problems. Maybe losing everything was the only way we could start to rebuild something real. I started visiting Grandma Ellen's old apartment complex every Sunday, not to see her. I knew she wouldn't talk to me, but just to sit in the parking lot and think. Sometimes I'd see her coming or going, and she'd nod at me politely but distantly, like I was a stranger she vaguely recognized. One Sunday in December, she surprised me by walking over to my car. "You've been coming here for weeks," she said through the window. "I know. I'm sorry if it bothers you." "It doesn't bother me. I just don't understand why." I rolled down the window and tried to find the right words. "Because I can't fix what happened, but I can't forget about it either. This is the only way I know how to... I don't know. Remember that it mattered." Grandma Ellen studied my face for a long moment. "Your parents raised you right, Sarah. Despite everything else, they raised you to have a conscience." It was the first kind thing anyone in my family had heard from her in 6 months. "How are you doing?" I asked. "Really?" She shrugged. Some days are better than others. I'm getting by. Is there anything I can do? Anything you need? What I need is $30,000, she said with a bitter laugh. Unless you've got that in your back pocket, there's not much anyone can do. She walked away before I could respond, but something about the conversation felt different. Not forgiven exactly, but maybe the beginning of something that could eventually become forgiveness. Spring came early that year. By March, the fig tree was starting to bloom again, tiny green buds appearing on branches that had looked dead all winter. I'd started spending time in the backyard, cleaning up the mess we'd let accumulate over the years. I fixed the broken lawn chairs, pulled weeds, even got the old swing set working again. It felt good to make something better instead of just watching everything fall apart. Mom found me out there one evening, watering the few vegetables I'd planted along the back fence. "Looks nice," she said. "Thanks." We stood there in silence for a while, watching water soak into the dark soil. "I think about her every day," Mom said suddenly. "Your grandmother. I think about what I took from her and She trailed off, shaking her head. "Have you tried calling her? She doesn't want to hear from me. I don't blame her. Maybe not. But maybe she needs to hear from you anyway." Mom looked at me with surprise. "What do you mean?" "I mean, maybe apologizing isn't about making yourself feel better. Maybe it's about making sure she knows that what happened to her mattered, that someone remembers what was lost." A few weeks later, I heard Mom on the phone late one night. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was different from her usual conversations. Slower, more careful, like she was choosing each word deliberately. The next morning, she told me she'd been calling Grandma Ellen every Sunday, leaving voicemails even though they were never returned. "What do you say?" I asked. "That I'm sorry, that I think about her every day, that I'm still trying to find a way to pay her back." Mom paused. "And that I hope someday she can forgive me, but I understand if she can't." It wasn't much, but it was something. And sometimes, when everything else is broken, something is enough to build on.